So here's the repository for an open source project. We forked this repository to contribute to it. Now there's a problem. This forked repository is not connected to the original or the base repository. So from time to time, it can get out of sync with the base repository. If other people contribute to the base repository and add new commits to the master branch, we are not going to be aware of those new commits. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to keep this forked repository up to date. So in this local repository on our machine, we have a reference to our forked repository called origin, right? We can add another reference to the base repository and then use the pull command to bring in the new commits. And then we can push them to our forked repository. As simple as that. Let's see this in action. Earlier, we briefly talked about the remote command. With this command, we can manage the remote repositories. So currently we have a single remote, that is origin. We can run git remote -v, that is short for verbose, to see more details about these remote repositories. So here we have two channels, fetch for getting new objects and push for pushing objects. Both these channels are mapped to this URL. Now to add a new remote, we type git remote add. We give it a name like base, or a lot of people like to call it upstream. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Now we need to grab the URL of the base or the original repository. So here on my personal GitHub account, here's our Viddler repository. I'm going to grab the URL and then paste it over here. Good. Now let's look at our remote repositories. So we have origin and upstream. Once again, we can run remote -v. So you can see origin is pointing to Vidly in my Code with Mosh account, whereas upstream is pointing to Vidly in my personal account, okay? Now let's say we made a mistake and we want to rename this remote repository. We simply type git remote, rename. We want to rename upstream to base. That's better. If you're done with the remote, we can simply remove it. We type git remote rm, and then we type the name. All right, so we're done here. Now I'm going to go to my original or the base repository and make a new commit. So here on my personal account, I'm going to edit this README file. So let's add a new line of code and then make a commit. Good. So we added a new commit to the master branch of the base repository. Now I'm going to switch to my forked repository. Now on my Code with Mosh account, look over here. GitHub is saying that this branch, our master branch, is one commit behind the master of the base repository. So back in the terminal, we need to use the fetch or the pull command to bring in the new commit. So I'm going to use fetch for now. Now, earlier in the section, we used the fetch command without specifying the name of the remote. And I told you that if we don't supply the name of the remote, by default, origin will be assumed. Now, in this case, we don't want to fetch the commits from origin because that is our forked repository. We want to get the new commits from the base repository. So here we type base. Good. So we got a new branch called base/master. Now let's look at our history. So here's our local master branch, and here's the master branch of the base repository. So our local master is behind the master of the base repository. So we should merge base/master into our local master. So first we switch to master and then run git merge base/master. Now in this case, because the local master is not diverged from the remote master, we're going to have a fast forward merge. Take a look. There you go. Fast forward. Now let's look at the history one more time. Okay, so now our local master and base/master are pointing to the same commit. Beautiful. So our local repository is in sync with the base repository. Now we need to push the changes into our forked repository. So git push. Now, back on my Code with Mosh account on GitHub, when I refresh the page, this notice is going to go away. Take a look. Now GitHub is saying that this branch is even with the master of the base repository. Beautiful. So this is how we can keep a forked repository up to date. Now back to the terminal, it's always a good practice to merge the master branch into your local feature branch because this will reduce the chance for conflicts in the future. If there are changes in the master that will affect your work, you want to make sure that your work is on top of those changes. So we're going to switch to our bug fix branch and then run git merge master. we're going to bring in the changes in master into the current branch. Now look, we have a conflict. So by resolving the conflicts locally at this point in time, we'll reduce the chance for future conflicts when the maintainer of the project wants to merge and close our pull request.